Chiamaka never imagined her life would turn into a nightmare. Just months ago, she had been an ambitious university student, struggling to pay her school fees but determined to push through. She carried the weight of her mother's sacrifices on her shoulders, sacrifices that had cost the poor woman everything, including the last of her prized wrappers, just to keep Chiamaka in school. But everything changed the night she crossed paths with Emeka. She had heard about him, the flashy, smooth-talking Yahoo boy with expensive cars and an entourage of gold-drenched friends. People whispered about him, warned innocent girls to stay away. But desperation had a way of making even the most cautious person blind. It started with a simple favor. Adaora, her roommate, had convinced her to come along, assuring her it was just a harmless visit. A few hours of comfort in luxury, nothing more. No one had forced her. No one had drugged her. She had entered Emeka's house willingly, trusting that nothing bad would happen. And nothing had, at least not in the way she had feared. She remembered the way the room had smelled of expensive cologne, the softness of the bed she had slept on, untouched. Emeka had been the perfect gentleman, or so she thought. But when she woke up, she wasn't in that luxurious bedroom anymore. She was tied up. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls of the shrine. A thick, metallic scent filled the air. Blood. Her heart pounded as she struggled, her cries swallowed by the chants of unseen figures. She was going to die. She was certain of it. Then something happened, something she still couldn't explain. A loud noise, a sudden commotion. She barely remembered how she got free. She just ran until her legs gave out. She had escaped, or so she thought. Now, sitting in a dimly lit clinic, staring at the test results in her trembling hands, she realized she had never truly escaped at all. She was pregnant. It didn't make sense. She was a virgin. The only time she had ever spent a night outside her hostel was in Emeka's house. And she was sure, absolutely sure, they had done nothing. But the scan said otherwise, 2 months pregnant. And it had been exactly 2 months since that night. Her stomach twisted in horror. She returned home hoping for comfort, for understanding. But what she found was worse than rejection. It was condemnation. Her mother, the woman who had suffered so much just to see her succeed, looked at her with disgust. "You have disgraced me," she spat, her voice thick with disappointment. Chiamaka tried to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. How could she even begin to tell a story that she herself didn't understand? Her uncle and neighbours weren't any better. They whispered, sneered, called her names. She was the girl who had gone to school and come back with a bastard. No one cared about the impossibility of it all. No one cared that she was just as confused as they were. With nowhere to turn, she did the only thing she could. She left. She travelled far as her little savings could take her, carrying nothing but her shame and the growing life inside her. She had no money, no family, no answers. But she swore one thing: she would survive. Emeka had always known how to play the game. Money, power, influence. He had all of it at his fingertips. When he was sentenced to 32 years in prison, he didn't flinch. He knew prison was only for the poor, for those without connections, without the means to bend the system to their will. And just as he expected, money spoke louder than justice. With a few well-placed bribes, a judge looked the other way. A prison official lost his file. The right people got paid, and within months he walked free. It was almost laughable. But Emeka had changed. He left the state as advised, relocating to another city where he could lay low and rebuild. He still had money, enough to keep him comfortable for a while, but something felt off. At first, he ignored it. His girls didn't excite him the way they used to. The luxury cars, the lavish parties, the endless flow of cash. It all felt empty. He forced himself back into the game. He reconnected with Baba Alhaji, expecting to pick up right where he left off. But the money didn't flow like before. The clients that once trusted him hesitated. Deals that should have gone smoothly collapsed at the last minute. And worst of all, every transaction, every move felt cursed. He began to lose. Frustrated, he called Baba Alhaji. The old man's voice was calm but laced with something Emeka had never heard before, something close to pity. "You think you can cheat the gods?" Emeka stiffened. "What do you mean? Your last ritual was incomplete." Cold fear gripped him. He had done everything Baba instructed, lured the girl, tied her up, brought her to the altar. But then, Chiamaka had escaped. Emeka clenched his jaw. But she was unconscious. We never. Exactly. The silence stretched between them. Then Baba spoke again, slower this time, like he was explaining something to a child. "The process is simple. The victim must be made unconscious. The ritual must be sealed with the seed of the one performing it. Then, and only then, can she be sacrificed. You took the first step, but she escaped before you could finish." Emeka's pulse thundered in his ears. "And now," Baba continued, "the seed you planted has germinated." Emeka shot to his feet, his heart racing. "What are you talking about?" "She carried your child." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Since she was not sacrificed, the bond remains unfinished. The energy meant to empower you was left incomplete. Chiamaka, however, had no time to think about him. She was too busy surviving. Chiamaka never looked back. She had no choice. After the shame, the accusations, and the way her own mother turned her back on her, staying was never an option. She had been abandoned when she needed love the most. There was no one to ask questions, no one to listen. They had already made up their minds about her. The whispers, the judging eyes, the names they called her, they still echoed in her mind. Ashawo, disgrace. After everything your mother did for you, this is how you repay her. She left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a child growing in her womb. She arrived in a new town, far from where anyone knew her name. No friends, no family, no shelter, just the will to survive. And somehow, she did. She found a tiny, leaking room to live in and started selling vegetables by the roadside. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And when the time came, she gave birth alone. Twins. She had no money for a hospital, so she did it the old way with the help of a midwife who took pity on her. The pain was unbearable, but when she heard their cries, it was like life had given her a new purpose. Peter and Paul. She looked at their tiny faces, their perfect fingers, their innocent eyes. For the first time in months, she smiled. She would make sure they never suffered the way she had. Years passed, and she worked harder than she thought humanly possible. She sold vegetables in the morning, cleaned houses in the afternoon, and took in laundry at night. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, but it didn't matter. Her boys were growing. She poured everything into them: love, discipline, education. They were smart, kind, and hard-working. She taught them to pray, to never look down on people, and to always be honest. But no matter how hard she worked, life was still unfair. By the time they reached senior secondary school, the financial burden became unbearable. She had struggled to put them through school, but now, with their final exams approaching, the cost was too much. She called them one night, her voice heavy with guilt. "My sons, I have failed you." "No, Mama," Paul said immediately. "You have never failed us." She looked at their faces so full of love and trust, and it made the pain worse. "I can only afford for one of you to take your final exams this year. The other will have to wait 2 more years until I can save enough." The room fell into silence. Then Paul smiled. "Peter should write first." "Paul, no," Peter started. "Yes," Paul insisted. "You've always wanted to study law. Go ahead. I will wait." Chiamaka's heart ached. This wasn't fair. Both her sons deserved an education, but life was forcing them to make sacrifices. Paul, however, never let it show that he was hurt. Instead, he buried himself in the thing he loved most: computers. One evening, while helping a customer at the market, he overheard a conversation about an international scholarship program. It was for students interested in cybersecurity, something he had always been passionate about. Curious, he found his way to a cyber cafe, borrowed money to pay for internet time, and searched for the scholarship. It felt like fate. He filled out the application, took the required online test, and waited. Weeks later, the email arrived. He had been selected, a full-ride scholarship to study cybercrime and security in the United States. When he ran home to tell his mother, she almost collapsed in shock. "America?" she gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "Yes, Mama, I did it. I am going to America." Tears streamed down her face. She had spent years fighting to give them opportunities, and now her son had created one for himself. The day he left for the airport, Chiamaka held him so tight he could barely breathe. "I am proud of you, my son, but promise me one thing." "Anything, Mama." "No matter how long you stay, never forget home." Paul swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I promise." And just like that, he was gone. Years passed. Paul flourished in the US, becoming one of the top cybersecurity experts in the country. Peter excelled in law, rising through the ranks until he became one of the most respected justices in Nigeria. Chiamaka had raised kings, but fate was about to bring them face to face with the past they never knew existed. Paul had become a force to be reckoned with in the world of cybercrime investigation. After years of rigorous study, sleepless nights, and countless cases cracked, he had risen to prominence in the United States. His ability to track down even the most elusive criminals had earned him respect, fear, and admiration. Yet, despite his success, something always felt incomplete. Maybe it was the years spent away from home. Maybe it was the unanswered questions about his father, the man their mother never spoke about. Or maybe it was fate, drawing him back to where it all began. In Nigeria, Peter had carved a name for himself in the legal world. Now a Chief Justice, he was known for his sharp mind and unwavering commitment to justice. He had spent years undoing the corruption that had plagued the judiciary, reopening cases where criminals had bought their freedom with blood money. One case in particular caught his attention: an old fraudster who had been sentenced to 32 years in prison but had never served a single day behind bars. The deeper Peter dug, the more the case unraveled. High-ranking prison officials had taken bribes to let the man go. Judges had been paid to bury the case. Everyone involved had moved on, confident that their sins would never catch up with them. But Peter wasn't one to let things go. At the same time, across the ocean, Paul had stumbled upon something chilling. His current assignment involved tracking down an elusive cybercriminal who had scammed American citizens out of millions. The case had remained unsolved for over a decade, but Paul was relentless. He followed the digital footprints, hacking through layers of false identities, encrypted accounts, and offshore transactions. And then, a face appeared on his screen. A name. A location. Paul's blood ran cold. Something about the man seemed familiar, yet he couldn't place it. He needed to be sure. Back in Nigeria, Chiamaka had never imagined she would live to see this day. Her sons had become everything she prayed for: successful, respected, powerful. But when Paul called, telling her he was finally coming home after 25 years, her joy was mixed with fear. Something was coming. Something dark. She could feel it in her bones. Emeka had spent the last 25 years running, but no matter how far he went, he couldn't outrun his past. It was always there, haunting him, suffocating him, reminding him of the horrors he had committed. The nightmares never stopped. Every night, he saw her, Chiamaka, tied up, struggling, her eyes filled with terror as Baba chanted incantations. He heard her screams, the desperate way she had fought to survive. And then he saw the blood. the sacrifice that never happened. That was where the nightmare always ended. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his chest pounding, a gnawing fear in his bones. Baba had warned him, "You planted a seed, Emeka, and now that seed has grown. Your destiny is tied to hers. As long as she lives, you are no longer in control of your fate." At the time, he had brushed it off. He had been young, arrogant, convinced he could cheat anything, including fate. But now, 25 years later, he knew the truth. He had lost everything. The money, the power, the influence. It was all gone. The same men he once bribed to escape justice had turned their backs on him. His accounts were frozen, his properties seized. The once glorified Yahoo boy was now a ghost of himself, hiding from both the law and the spirits that haunted him. And worst of all, the clock was ticking. Baba had told him he had 30 years to live if the ritual was not completed. 25 years had already passed. That meant he had only 5 left, if he was lucky. But Emeka wasn't sure he even had that much time. His health had begun to deteriorate. He had developed a strange illness, one that no doctor could explain. His body felt weak, his vision sometimes blurred. His hands shook uncontrollably, and the voices in his head grew louder every day. Find her. The words echoed through his mind over and over again. Find her before it's too late. But how? Chiamaka had disappeared after that night. He had tried searching for her in the past, but she had vanished without a trace. No one in their hometown had seen her. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Then, just when he had begun to lose hope, he overheard something that sent chills down his spine. A high-ranking judge had been reopening old cases involving men who had bribed their way out of prison sentences. And one of those cases was his. At first, he thought it was just a coincidence, but then he heard the name. Justice Peter. The name alone wouldn't have meant anything to him, but when he saw the picture of the young judge in the newspaper, his blood ran cold. The resemblance, the face. It was like looking at himself as a younger man. A painful realization hit him like a hammer to the chest. The child, Chiamaka's child. No, his child. The nightmare suddenly made sense. The ritual hadn't failed. It had worked in a way he never expected. The seed he planted had truly grown, and now that seed had come back to haunt him. It wasn't just Peter. There were 2 of them. The newspaper mentioned that Justice Peter had a twin brother, a cybersecurity expert in the United States. 2 sons, 2 enemies hunting him down, one for justice, the other for revenge. He felt his chest tighten, his breathing becoming ragged. Fate had played a cruel game. His own blood was the one tracking him down. There was no escaping it now. He had to find Chiamaka. She was the only one who could stop this, the only one who could save him. But would she? Would she even listen? Or had he already run out of time? The dinner table was set, the warm glow of the chandelier casting a soft light over the room. Laughter filled the air as Peter and Paul shared stories of their lives, one as a renowned judge, the other as a cybercrime expert from the United States. Chiamaka smiled, watching her sons, her heart swelling with pride. They had made something of themselves despite the struggles, despite the pain. But deep inside, a storm brewed. Tonight, everything was about to change. Paul leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Mum, you won't believe it. Peter and I have been unknowingly working on the same case." Peter nodded, taking a sip from his glass. "It's actually funny how fate works. I've been reviewing old bribery cases and one name keeps showing up. Someone who was sentenced 25 years ago but never served his time. And now, Paul is tracking the same man for cyber fraud." Paul pulled out his phone and scrolled through his files. "This guy has been scamming people for years. He's smart, never leaves a trace, but I finally got a match. Want to see his face?" Chiamaka froze. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming before Paul even turned the screen toward them. There he was, Emeka. The past she had spent 25 years trying to bury now stared back at her from the screen. Peter's face twisted with disgust. This man thinks he can escape justice, but I swear I will bring him down. Paul smirked. Oh, I'll make sure he never scams another person again. Chiamaka felt her body tremble. Her sons were hunting their own father. They didn't know. They had no idea that the man they were determined to destroy was the very man whose blood ran through their veins. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at them, so strong, so determined. What was she supposed to do? Tell them the truth? Or let them unknowingly hunt down their own father? Her hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Either way, everything was about to change. To be continued. If you were in Chiamaka's shoes, would you tell your sons the truth or let them make Emeka pay for his crimes? What would you do? Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next part. Leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from.